Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Rural Living and Egg Extension videos. I'm Matthew Wells, Rural Extension Specialist with Lethbridge County. Today I have the privilege of interviewing Grant Colling, our favorite professional arborist, who's going to talk about some tree health today and a little bit of insects, a little bit of soil, the whole shebang.
Plant health care.
Yeah. What he said.
This hawthorn. So this is a hawthorn tree. It's a toba hawthorn. And what they've done is they've genetically altered out the thorns that are typically on these so that municipalities can plant them. They're fairly hardy. Unfortunately, the deers tend to enjoy them much more than we do. Now, luckily, we've got some suckers coming off the bottom, which might help with the rejuvenation of the plant itself. And the deer can continue to beat up the dead part. So not all is lost. And as you can see, the municipality has come in and put these weeping tile pipes around the bottoms so that the weed whippers don't kill off all the new suckers too. They're a hardy tree. Unfortunately, they do have an allopathic relationship with Rocky Mountain junipers. To a lesser degree, other junipers, and right across the alley are junipers, so they will end up getting what they call gymnosporangium. It's a fungal blight. And there is no sprays for it. We've tried Captan, we've tried Phyton 27, all these different products to control the spores of these, but it's just that they've never existed in nature before together. But we're planting them in city together, so that's where we're ending up with some of these issues. So if you do have a big Rocky Mountain juniper or junipers in your yard, don't get a hawthorn, you will have a disease. More deer damage over here. And there's the proof. As evidence. This one's still alive, and you can see buds in all the trees at this time of year are starting to break out. So this is the time of year where we don't want to be doing any pruning, we don't want to be doing any fertilizing, we don't want to be doing any spraying. We just want to be talking about trees with the favorite county people. With these trees, and any tree for that matter, if you have a question as to a dead branch, you think it's dead, here's one that looks like it's kind of dead, sort of type thing. You peel that bud off and bring it over to the camera so you guys can see it, and there's no green ring around the outside, so that branch is dead. If there's green in there, that's chlorophyll, and chlorophyll can't translocate through dead tissue, obviously. And typical reasons for a lot of your trees to die back would be a fungus, which blocks up the vascular bundle, so that the nutrients from the soil can't come up and it can't be released by the old xylem that holds the energy in it. This one here, you can see the staining on the bark. Actually got some fire blight as well. That's the other thing they're susceptible to a lesser degree than apples, but still they do get it. Mountain ashes are also susceptible to it, and we've got a whole bunch of samples here, so I'll try to be a little quicker on this one than we were last time. Add on to this. With this new growth here, if you're trying to make a hedge out of it, or you don't want to go and buy more plant material like lilacs, you take one of these stems and just pin it down with a staple or a couple of pieces of wire over top of it into the dirt, right down into the dirt, cover it over, leave the end out, but cover some of these nodes, keep it moist, and it will self-layer. It'll slowly start to move in the direction that you have these new suckers out, so you don't have to buy new plants. It's called layering. You can look that up online. It'll explain it quite a bit. So with the shrubs, they're a vegetative reproducer, and I explain the layering to you. It's a long way for them to move the chemistry that is involved in the plant's growth and future. So with most shrubs, they're really short and really small. Probably a better practice to rejuvenate them, not the conifers, but the deciduous shrubs. Rejuvenate them down to about 4 to 6 inches off the ground, or at least come in and take out some of the bigger, older ones every year to encourage more growth down low. Now that's more of for a barrier or a fence, or just something to control some privacy or noise or dust along the edge of a property. But if you let them just go, this is what they're going to look like every year. New vegetation coming off the bottom, and they'll get to that height. These ones, lilacs, don't typically get any real problems. So we do have several cases over the last 20 some odd years of what they call a lilac borer. But it's not the kind of borer that just outbreaks and kills the plant. It just feeds typically on one or two, reproduces, and takes off and attacks another plant. So that's not one we're terribly worried about. Okay, so ornamental apples. I'll try not to get too far away from you. This one here has purple foliage. It's got different names, Thunderchild, Moonglow, all these different terminologies that the garden centers use to promote these types of plants. These guys are extremely hardy. You can stick them in places where there's no irrigation. As long as you water it through the first year, they'll typically take off quite well. And the little apples are what the deer will eat. That's why they don't typically go after the trunk or eating any of the vegetation down low. They aren't prone to fire blight typically as compared to an apple. And as you can see, the difference between a ornamental crab and a true apple, fire blight, you can see the leaves are still attached after last season's growth, and cankering on this side here. Up here you can see the actual lines of the canker. I don't know if you can see it on that side or not. Not really, but yeah. So you can see it's got ribs on it. That's dead tissue, drying up, dehydrating, and falling apart. And obviously, this part's definitely dead. So there is preventions for it. They're extremely costly. So I don't recommend getting involved with the apples. We've got an egg sac here too, if you want to get this, Matt.
Yeah, for sure.
Right over here. This is for a caterpillar, or some kind of a caterpillar. The moth flies in the fall, lays the eggs right on the sunny side of the tree typically, so you don't have to go around the shady side to look at it. And then you can see the actual babies that are going to hatch and feed on this tree, whatever's left of it. So most of the trees in our region really like a pH of about 7. Under 7 is ideal. As the summer progresses, more of our irrigation water tends to get a little higher in terms of the pH. So we're actually raising the pH as we go along. So if you're already at 7.5 with your soil sample that you took in the early part of the season, took it into a lab and you're 7.5, it could get as high as 7.8, 7.9 as the season progresses, which is going to limit the amount of nutrients that the trees can uptake. So when you are getting fertilizer or using fertilizer, you want to make sure that it's acidic when you're putting it into the soil, either commercial outfit or yourself doing it. You want to make sure that fertilizer is very low so it can take it up. And as with Mother Nature, we only fertilize once a year, and we don't fertilize trees every year. Our grass we do, but our trees we don't. We're trying to build wood with trees. That's where the energy is stored. It's not stored in the foliage. The foliage creates the energy and stores it in the old xylem wood every year after the end of the fall, when the foliage falls off. So fertilization, especially synthetic fertilization, is not highly recommended, other than maybe once every 3 or 4 years if you are growing it in other grasses, like your substrates are grasses and not mulch and wood chips and stuff like that. Gravel's fine too. You can get lots of minerals out of the gravel. But right around the base of the tree, you want to make sure that the gravel is away from the trunk of the tree, because every time it blows in the wind, it's like sandpaper against the trunk, and it will open up wounds, and unfortunately you'll end up with issues like fire blight. All kinds of fungal and bacterial blights can get in at the basal area. Wayfaring tree. You're going to want to get a bud of this guy. Picture of the bud, if you can. And a piece of the foliage here too. Is my hand in the way?
No, it's good.
Okay. These guys are super hardy too. Haven't had to spray them. Getting them established is a little trickier. They do prefer that 5.5 to 6.5 range in pH during establishment. So, a little bit of sulfur around the basal area to keep that soil acidic will really help. Aluminum sulfate is another one, a little harder to get, but those two things will acidify the soil for the first year. Almost anything you're planting, if you're trying to get it established, especially if it's not native to our area or not even naturalized to our area, you want that soil profile to be more acidic, because we've got the heavy clay and we're adding irrigation water. Those two compound the raising of the pH level. along with the sun's heat and evaporation. Over here we got a honeysuckle, and as you can see, it starts off as a cute little shrub, and it is no longer a shrub. It's got a significant trunk on it. This one attracts lots of little birds, but in particular it attracts the hummingbirds. So if you're looking for hummingbirds, this is a good one to have along with the berry producers. They just seem to really prefer it. Now you'll see damage on them sometimes down low, particularly out in the country. The cats love to scratch honeysuckle. I don't know why, but it's something I see damage on them quite often. People call it something wrong with my tree. I get there, and it's just the cats just love to claw at it. They don't do that with lilacs. They don't seem to do that with the carraganas. They don't seem to go after the wayfaring trees. They just really love the honeysuckle. So it's not a pest control issue. And what I suggest out in the country in particular, even in the city for that matter, is you're going to want to have a loose piece of wire. You can stabilize the wire away from the tree, but just a loose piece of wire on the bottom. That's going to keep your porcupines and other critters from wanting to crawl up there and take the bark off. Our pines are probably the most damaged from that particular activity from porcupines. They get up there and they feed on the bark and they go all the way around girdling that branch. That branch has to die. This is a plum. Looks like a Canada plum. So a real good fruit producer in our area. I have noticed the ones that we're buying over the past 10-15 years do send up a lot of root suckers coming up off the root system. I don't know if that's a genetic fault, but we are seeing a lot of suckers coming off them. We've got 2 edible forests, one in Coaldale and one in Lethbridge, and they're both having a lot of suckers. So I'm spending a lot of time digging down and pruning those off, and that does stop them, but it's a lot of extra work for sure. These guys are very hardy. You will get some aphids going after them, but for the most part, dormant oil applications are all I do on all my edible products. And I do that right up until bud break. After bud break, we got to drop the rates of dormant oil in the blend because it will burn foliage. It's like a magnifying glass. Prop. It's like a magnifying glass on the foliage, and you can actually cause burning of the foliage. So you don't want to be doing that with the dormant oil. The dormant oil application rates are on the label. Read the label, follow the label, and you'll be fine. Okay. This is what happens with a mature okay, so this is a mature hawthorn, and it's fairly normal for them to have the upright growth. It's a stress indicator, but it's also a feature of hawthorns is to grow in really goofy ways. It's not good for the tree to do this, because what's happening is this branch here is blocking out the sunlight to anything in behind it. Okay, so they're causing harm to themselves. So when we're pruning these, we typically come in and take out the upright growth. So anything that's growing back into the tree, we take it out. Okay, so some people might call this a pear tree because there's 2 of them. That's just bad, just bad. So the mountain ash is very distinguishable by its foliage, and what happens is you get a whole bunch of this called compound leaf. So this is one petiole, and then the little guys are petiolets, and each leaf is a leaflet. That is a leaf. That's the taxonomical explanation, I guess, of it. So these guys stayed on. Now that could have been an early frost. It could be chemical damage. It could be fire blight. It could be septoria. There's 1,000 things that could be happening. Now I'm kind of ruling out any of the blights because I don't see anything on the bottom side of this foliage that would indicate spores. But for some reason or another, they've both kept their foliage attached to the tree. So that means the asbestic acid that's stored in the old xylem wood didn't get to the base of this petiole to force it off. The leaves were stayed on, and it could have been just somebody sprayed it with water, irrigation hit it with water, and that night it froze. So it could be that simple. or it could be that complex that maybe they put down a bunch of mulch with some kind of fungus or virus in it, and it's somehow translocated into the tree. I don't see any signs of it throughout the tree, but that's it. These are really good trees in protected situations, kind of like the amber maple we're going to look at. They're good in protected situations. When they're left open, they typically have more trouble. Now that's typical, it's not always, but that's what you're going to get with these guys. Great little berries. Birds love these trees. So if you're looking to get more birds into your yard, don't crown clean your spruce trees and get some of these. They come with different colored bark. Some of them have more of a silvery sheen to them. You've got the showy mountain ash and you got the European mountain ash. It's also called a rowan tree. So there's lots of different common names sort of type thing, but they're definitely a good tree for our region. And I don't even see any egg sacs on this, so there's not going to be any issues with bugs feeding on it. Now, this thing here is something we don't get a chance to see too often. It's a branch bark ridge, and it furrows out. And you can see it up here too. Furrows out. So when you're making your pruning cut, like that's a fairly decent pruning cut. You want to prune outside of that a little bit. That's perfect. Okay. So he's left. There's a branch bark ridge, and you got the angle is opposite. So branch bark ridge, angle your cut opposite. And when you're doing a pruning cut, I didn't bring my saw and stuff this time. You do an undercut here, top cut here, break the branch off, then you do your finish cut at the branch collar, just outside the branch collar. That's where all those little chemicals are that help it to do this woundwood development thing. Okay, so this is kind of your guideline, and you can see all these little ridges. That's your branch collar. So if you're gonna make a pruning cut on this, you're gonna do your bottom cut, top cut, break it away, then you take your handsaw and do your pruning cut in opposition to that particular ridge. And then you'll never have a problem with your trees ever again. Scout's honor. Okay. It's all about reducing the stresses. It's not about making everything perfect and having everything perfect, but if you do your best on pruning and fertilizing and you're spraying at a minimal level, your trees are going to do so much better than they would if you're just following the book, because a lot of the books aren't written here. We've got two maples in here. One is really tiny. It's over there. We'll walk past it. This is a shining example of an amber maple or a mountain maple or whatever you want to call it. It usually doesn't sucker like this, but you can see this guy's really old. They're usually not this big and fragile, but you can see where, you know, birds are moving in. This is kind of a habitat tree, and we've got another one over there I'm going to talk about too. And what they do is they find the old rotten wood and they chip in there. They're not taking live wood, so they're not being a pest. They're actually just collecting bugs from this tree and building their nests right into the tree. There's another bigger one up here. Some smaller ones there. And they just go into the old rotten wood, and that's all they do. Now, even if that tree breaks away and falls down, it's still going to be attached to a lot of roots, so it's going to continue to send up more life. These guys turn a brilliant red in the fall, and again, the opposite budding. We have had a lot of issues with the mountain maples and the amber maples with chlorosis. My thoughts are that most of it's from the pH levels of the soils that they're growing in, and that obviously they're not native to our area. The mountain maple's more in BC than it would be in Alberta. It's not actually just in the mountains, it's in the BC mountains, Selkirks rather than the Rocky Mountain Range. And they are quite hardy. I mean, they do quite well, but they do tend to get that yellowish look. I've hit them with the iron, chelated iron several times, really no difference. But once I fertilize them in the spring and acidify that soil, that seems to do the trick. Okay, so that's a myrrh maple. A-M-U-R, not a myrrh. So don't put it with your cows. So this looks like a Norway maple. Again, opposite budding, and quite hardy in our region. Obviously, it's put up with lawnmower blight, sending up suckers, so it's a little bit stressed. So probably more water and maybe even a fertilization here and there, and stop hitting it with lawnmower. That's the biggest thing. Bigger leaves on these than you would get on the amers or the mountain maples, but they're quite a hardy tree in our area. Softer, smoother bark. The downside for these trees is you can't really cable and brace them if they do develop any kind of a crack or a split. If you try to cable these, it just rots around the cable attachments. It rots through. If you try to bolt it, it rots around the bolts. It actually causes the failure at the point where you tried to successfully keep them. So they have to be well pruned while they're young to establish a proper canopy that's going to stay for you for a long time. An issue that people are having with maples, and it's not coming from the Norway maples or the amers or the mountain maples, it's coming from the Manitoba maples, and that's the maple bug. I just got a call from a company in Okotoks yesterday having some issues with maple bugs, and really there's not a lot you can do with them. They don't hurt the tree. They feed on the seeds, and they live in the cavities. So if you got a cavity in your tree, you got the option to fill it up, and don't use concrete or anything, and don't use that foamy stuff. Best actually just to kind of put a piece of plastic over top of it and tape it on, and you're gonna have to replace the tape, but you don't want to be sealing anything in or anything too permanent. So you don't want to be putting a piece of tin or filling it up with cement, for example, is not a good thing, because the lime in cement is extremely base, which is going to cause a lot of issues for an acid-loving tree. You don't want it base products, so no cement. Maple bugs, around my deck, all I do is I spray a little product called pine salts for cleaning your floors. I mix it 100 to 1 in a bucket, and I put the little hand sprayers and I go around spraying the deck. They don't like the smell of the pine salt. I'm thinking it's the tannins in the tree that they don't like, because they typically don't go after pines. They go after Manitoba maples, which are sweet sugars. Tannins are bitters, so that might be the reason that they don't come around. But after a rain or a week of sitting outside, the pine sol is ineffective, so you have to do it again every weekend. And you got to put up with the smell of pine sol. But it's either the bug or the pine sol. They can be controlled, chemically controlled, with contact pesticides. It's not overly effective, but it does work. The best blend that we've achieved is a little bit of dormant oil mixed with pyrethrin. It's a contact, and it's an extract from the chrysanthemum plant, which works really good on controlling their populations. Okay, so this is a Japanese tree lilac. It's in the lilac family, but it takes a tree form, and you can tell because it's opposite budding. So the buds are coming off opposite of each other. On other trees, they're alternate. All I have is lilacs here, so all I can show you green ash, it's all opposite too. Opposite budding is on several species of trees we have here. Alternate would be like elms, poplars. You'll see it like even your buckeyes are alternate. So that's where a bud comes off here, and then the next bud comes off here and comes up here. If it's opposite, they're coming off opposite of each other. So it's one way to help identify your trees too. If you're going online or you're using a key in the back of a book, and I brought the book too, but I didn't bring it here. So to key a tree out, that's one of the features that they use, rather than the horticulturally accepted way of identifying plants by their flowering, their reproductive organs, sort of thing. So this is a Japanese tree lilac, and these little lines here are called lenticels. And this is where the gas exchange. So the tree picks up a particle of copper down here, attaches to either water or nitrogen, and it flows along that root, comes up into the tree, and it gets to here, and it needs that copper right there. So it drops that off, and then it expels the oxygen from these lenticels. Oxygen, whatever gases it's not using, that's where it expels it, gets rid of it. Same thing on the bottom side of the foliage. You see the little, you don't see them, I guess, unless you got a magnifying glass, but they're called stomata. And they open and they create the suction that pulls the nutrients up after the osmosis process underground comes into the tree. With these guys here, you can see you have this nasty inclusion here. And they call it an inclusion because in between those two stems, bark is being produced. And eventually, one of these two is going to go, and it's usually the small guy. Nature's not fair. She tends to preserve the biggest and the strongest rather than the smallest, the weakest. But that's called an inclusion. So you have bark growing in between there. If you got that up 50 feet, you're going to have a problem. It's going to split off, and it's probably going to land on something that you have value in. But that's your Japanese tree lilac. And again, this is another one of those trees where, you know, a lot of the trees I've talked about today, we don't typically do any spraying or any fertilizing or any applications to them at all because they don't get the pests that you may find on other tree species. There's another one right here, more multi-stemmed than it should be. At a younger age, they could have been pruned, but didn't happen, so now it's got multi-stem, more like a lilac bush than a Japanese tree lilac. You can see all this green and little white patches and stuff like that. And what that's called is the answer to this question. What did the mushroom say to the fungus? He said, "Hi, I'm liking you." That might get edited out too. So I see here, this one's going into to release some spores to grow. That's the actual fruiting body. The big black one with the round cover. These guys are starting to open up too. So they'll spread out and cover the tree. They do no harm to the tree. They don't cause any issues. It's a symbiotic relationship. They're just extracting a little bit of sugars or starches or carbohydrates or whatever they're in need of at that point in time from the release from these lenticels. And those are just gas exchange valves. There's nothing terribly fancy about them, but that's what they do. Same thing on the birches, but they're black. And moving along. Sorry. Very telling what kind of pine it is, sort of thing. So this is a Scots pine. The orange bark is the dead giveaway.